Have you ever sat by a river, watching the water flow from upstream to downstream, the whole river teeming with life, large plants growing along both banks, fish and shrimp darting through the current? But imagine this. One day, someone builds a massive dam upstream, trapping all the water in a giant reservoir above. What happens downstream? The riverbed dries up, the plants wither, the fish die, the entire ecosystem collapses. What I want to talk about today is actually closely related to that river, except we're not talking about water. We're talking about money. In the age of AI, our economic system is developing a deeply serious problem with how money flows, and this problem could end up affecting every single one of us. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, make sure to hit subscribe and tap the bell icon so you don't miss anything. Today's topic is the structural economic crisis of the AI automation era. Sounds academic, I know, but I'm going to break it down in the most straightforward way I can. I'll start with how AI is replacing human jobs, then explain why governments keep printing money, and after that, why printing money actually makes the rich richer and ordinary people poorer. Finally, I'll talk about what role gold plays in all of this chaos, and what we as ordinary people can do about it. Ready? Let's dive in. First, let me ask you a question. How far do you think AI has actually come? I'm not talking about the kind of robots you see in sci-fi movies. I'm talking about things that are already happening right now, in the real world. According to the International Monetary Fund, roughly 40% of all jobs globally are exposed to AI disruption. In advanced economies, that number rises to 60%. The World Economic Forum's 2025 report goes further. It projects that by 2030, 92 million jobs will be displaced worldwide. Now, the same report also projects the creation of 170 million new jobs, a net gain of 78 million. But here's the catch. There's an enormous skills gap between the people being displaced and the new positions being created. A postal clerk in Ohio isn't going to magically become an AI engineer in San Francisco overnight, right? At this point, you might be thinking, but every time there's been a major technological revolution, people panicked about mass unemployment, and it always turned out fine. And honestly, that's a fair point. The steam engine wiped out handloom weavers. Electricity transformed how factories operated. Computers completely reshaped the modern office. But every single time, as old jobs disappeared, new ones emerged, and the labor market eventually rebalanced. There's actually a concept in economics called the lump of labor fallacy, the mistaken assumption that the total amount of work in an economy is fixed. History shows that productivity gains lower the cost of goods, which gives consumers more disposable income to spend on new wants and needs, which in turn creates entirely new industries and jobs. I genuinely agree with this historical pattern. And I believe the AI era will also create many jobs we can't even imagine right now. Just like nobody 20 years ago could have predicted that social media manager or influencer economy would become massive employment categories. That said, there are real reasons to be concerned this time. Why? Because previous technological revolutions, while they did affect multiple types of labor, usually had a primary direction of impact, and the pace of technological diffusion was slow enough to give society decades to adapt. But today's AI is attacking on both fronts simultaneously. White-collar work, document processing, legal analysis, financial auditing, even software development, all of it can be automated by AI. And on the blue-collar side, warehouse logistics, factory assembly, even restaurant service robots are already making inroads. What makes this AI revolution different is that its impact on both white-collar and blue-collar work is happening almost simultaneously. And the pace of technological iteration is measured in months, even weeks, drastically compressing. The Windows society has to adapt. So the real risk may not be permanent mass unemployment, but rather the pain of transition when the speed of disruption outpaces the speed of adaptation. The vacuum in between can generate enormous economic and social pressure. Alright, so let's dig into a core question. Why are companies compelled to replace people with AI? The answer is simple. Money. Cost. Think about it. When a company hires an employee, it pays salary, pension contributions, benefits, training costs, and management overhead. That all adds up. An AI system? Sure, there's upfront investment, but over time, the marginal cost keeps dropping. Plus, AI doesn't need vacations, doesn't need lunch breaks, doesn't get tired, won't call in sick. It runs 24/7 without stopping. When AI can do the same work at a lower cost than a human, any rational business owner will choose AI. This isn't a moral issue, it's a survival issue. If you don't adopt AI and your competitors do, their costs will be lower, their prices will be cheaper, and the market will eliminate you. McKinsey's research estimates that at current technology levels, approximately 57% of all work hours in the United States could theoretically be automated. So what happens after a massive number of people are replaced by AI? This is where we need to introduce a crucial economic concept, and I'll explain it with a metaphor from nature. Think of a healthy forest ecosystem. At the very bottom, you have soil and microorganisms acting as decomposers. In the middle layer, you have plants as producers. Above them, you have animals as consumers. And at the very top, you have apex predators like tigers and lions. No layer can be missing. If any one layer disappears on a large scale, the entire system collapses. Even the apex predators at the top won't survive. The economy works exactly the same way. Workers at the bottom and middle aren't just producers. They're also consumers. Every month, when they get paid, they go eat out, buy things, pay rent, go on trips. That spending becomes revenue for businesses, and business revenue in turn becomes investment, tax revenue, and more employment. So what happens if this massive base of consumers suddenly loses income or sees their income drop dramatically? The answer is the beginning of a vicious cycle. AI replaces human labor. People's incomes fall. When incomes fall, spending drops. When spending drops, businesses see revenues decline. When revenues decline, businesses are forced to cut more jobs and deploy more AI. Then even more people lose income, and spending contracts further. Once this cycle starts spinning, it's like a whirlpool, it turns faster and faster, pulling everything deeper. Now, I want to be fair here. This vicious cycle model is a simplified projection. In reality, there are buffering mechanisms. The most obvious one is that as AI dramatically lowers production costs, the prices of goods and services will also fall. Your wages might be lower, but what if everything gets even cheaper? Your real purchasing power might not decline. It could even go up. On top of that, government safety nets, unemployment insurance, progressive taxation, and other automatic stabilizers provide a certain degree of cushioning. But the critical question is, will these buffering mechanisms be fast enough and large enough to match the scale and speed of AI disruption? If the pace of adjustment is slower than the pace of disruption, even if the system eventually rebalances, the social pain during the transition period will still be enormous. There's a concept in economics called insufficient effective demand. Keynes talked about it a long time ago. Traditional demand shortfalls are usually cyclical, like a recession that eventually recovers. But AI-driven demand shortfalls could be structural, because displaced workers simply cannot retrain for AI engineering or other high-skill roles in a short time frame. It's like taking a plant that spent its whole life growing on flat ground and suddenly transplanting it to a mountaintop. It may not be able to adapt. At this point, I want to highlight a specific concept: the fluidity of money. Remember the river metaphor from the beginning? Money plays the same role in the economy that water plays in nature. Water must flow to sustain life. If all the water collects in a single lake and stops flowing downstream, the rivers below will dry up, the land will turn barren, and the ecosystem will die. Money works the same way. If it concentrates in the accounts of a few large corporations and wealthy individuals without flowing into the hands of ordinary consumers, the downstream economy, retail services, small businesses will shrivel up from lack of liquidity. There's actually an economic indicator that measures this flow. It's called the velocity of money. According to data from the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, the velocity of M2 money supply in the United States peaked at 2.19 in 1997. By the third quarter of 2025, it had fallen to just 1.409. The causes of this decline are multifaceted structural changes in the financial system, a tendency to hold more savings in a low interest rate environment, and the mechanical effect of quantitative easing inflating the monetary base. But one factor worth paying attention to is that an increasing share of money is sitting in financial asset market rather than circulating through the real consumer economy, reflecting a measurable slowdown in how money moves. And here's the troubling implication. When trillions of newly created dollars keep pooling in financial markets and on the balance sheets of a wealthy few, rather than cycling through the real economy, it doesn't just slow growth. It actively widens the gap between rich and poor. Every dollar that sits idle at the top is a dollar that never becomes someone's wage, someone's sale, someone's opportunity. The dam gets higher, and the downstream gets drier. Now let's talk about another really important phenomenon: AI red ocean competition. What's red ocean competition? In simple terms, it's when everyone competes using the same tools, and nobody gains an advantage. The only thing left to do is undercut each other on price. In the early days of AI adoption, whoever moved first had a genuine edge: higher efficiency, lower costs, more market share. But the problem is, once every company starts using AI, efficiency gains from AI alone are no longer a competitive advantage. They're just the price of admission. Without AI, you can't even get in the door. But with AI, you still don't have a meaningful edge, because every one of your competitors is using it too. Now, companies that excel at integrating AI with their unique data, domain expertise, and customer relationships can still potentially build differentiated competitive moats. But that kind of deep integration requires massive resources and specialized knowledge. For most small and medium-sized businesses, the reality is that everyone's cost structure looks roughly the same, and the only lever left is to slash prices, compressing margins to razor-thin levels. The efficiency gains created by AI don't turn into excess profits for these companies. They get devoured by ferocious competition. This phenomenon is actually a lot like an arms race. Think about it. Every country spends enormous amounts on weapons, but because everyone upgrades at the same time, the relative security situation doesn't change. The only result is that everyone has burned through a mountain of cash. The AI space works exactly the same way. Companies are forced to pour staggering sums into training models, building computing infrastructure, acquiring data, and hiring AI talent, all just to not fall behind. This investment creates heavy fixed costs, but in a red ocean, the returns keep getting thinner. And here's something really worth noting. The ones actually making money aren't the companies using AI, they're the companies selling AI tools. Think Nvidia selling chips, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud, Amazon AWS, the cloud service providers plus the companies building foundation models. It's exactly like the 19th century gold rush. The people who really got rich weren't the ones sticking for gold, they were the ones selling shuffles. Profits funneled toward a handful of platform-level companies, while the vast majority of application layer businesses struggle to survive in the red ocean. This further intensifies the concentration of wealth. Alright, now that we've covered how AI disrupts both jobs and business competition, let's move to the topic that hits your wallet most directly: money printing. Think about it when the real economy faces the structural difficulties I just described: shrinking employment, insufficient consumption, razor-thin corporate profits. Government tax revenue naturally takes a major hit. Tax revenues fall, but social spending rises. Unemployment benefits, healthcare subsidies, all of it costs money. The fiscal deficit grows wider, and debt keeps snowballing. When traditional fiscal tools are exhausted, the government turns to the central bank for help. The central bank injects liquidity into the system through quantitative easing, buying government bonds directly, and other mechanisms. In plain language, it prints money. But here's the critical question. Does printing money actually solve the problem? Let me walk you through a thought experiment to understand what money printing really means at its core. Imagine that one day, everything denominated in US dollars, your bank account, your salary, your debts, the price of every good, is simultaneously multiplied by 10. What would happen? The answer is absolutely nothing would change. Your monthly salary was $10,000. Now it's $100,000. But a bowl of wonton noodles was $30. Now it's $300. Your mortgage was $3 million. Now it's $30 million. Everyone's relative wealth position is completely unchanged. Every good's relative price is unchanged. It's like switching your unit of measurement from meters to decimeters. The numbers get 10 times bigger, but the reality they describe is exactly the same. This thought experiment reveals a crucial insight. If newly printed money were distributed to everyone in perfect proportion, inflation would have essentially zero effect on anyone's real purchasing power. In other words, the impact of inflation on your purchasing power doesn't come from how much money is printed. It comes from whether the new money is distributed evenly. But in reality, newly printed money is never distributed evenly. And this brings us to a concept called the Cantillon Effect. The name comes from Richard Cantillon, an 18th century French economist who observed something critical very early on. When new money enters the economic system, it doesn't arrive everywhere at once. It doesn't fall from the sky like rain, landing equally on everyone. Where does the new money flow first? To the institutions closest to the central bank: commercial banks, large financial institutions, publicly listed corporations. These first receivers can use the new money to buy assets, stocks, real estate, bonds, commodities, while prices are still at pre-expansion levels. This drives up asset prices. By the time the money eventually trickles down to ordinary people through wage increases, social benefits, and other channels, prices and asset values have already climbed significantly. Your nominal salary might go up a little, but you're facing prices that have already gone through a round of inflation. Your real purchasing power has actually declined. Of course, the strength of the Cantillon effect isn't constant. It depends on the specific policy tools used. For example, in 2020, the US government sent stimulus checks directly to every household. That was a deliberate attempt to bypass financial intermediaries and put money straight into people's hands, which did weaken the Cantillon effect to some degree. But even so, the primary transmission channel of quantitative easing remains the inflation of asset prices. And since asset ownership itself is highly concentrated, the overall effect still disproportionately benefits asset holders. When you combine the Cantillon effect with something called the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule, the results become even more striking. We know that the distribution of wealth in society is already highly concentrated. A small number of large corporations and high-income individuals hold the majority of assets. According to the 2026 World Inequality Report, the richest 10% of the global population own 75% of total global wealth, and the poorest half of the world's population, they own just 2%. Even more staggering, the richest 0.001% globally, roughly 60,000 ultra-wealthy individuals, hold wealth equivalent to 3 times that of the entire bottom half of the world population. When money printed by central banks flows through the financial system, it naturally gravitates toward those who already hold large amounts of assets. Large corporations have easier access to low-interest loans. Asset holders benefit from passive wealth accumulation as asset prices rise. The result is that while everyone's account balances may grow in nominal terms, those of large corporations and the ultra-wealthy grow far faster. This is a form of hidden wealth transfer. Put simply, if the printed money keeps accumulating at the top and barely flows back into the real economy, the wealth gap doesn't just persist, it compounds. Each round of monetary expansion that fails to reach ordinary people effectively makes the rich richer and leaves everyone else further behind. It's not a gap that stays still, it's a gap that accelerates. Let me bring back the river metaphor to make this crystal clear. Imagine the economic system as a river network. When the central bank prints money, it's like pouring water into the headwaters upstream, but that water doesn't flow evenly through the entire river. It first fills a few massive reservoirs, the big banks and financial institutions. Those reservoirs use the water to irrigate the farmland immediately around them, meaning they invest it in asset markets like stocks, real estate, and bonds. By the time the water finally seeps downstream, the farmers down below find that the flow has been greatly reduced, and the price of water has gone up because most of it was siphoned off along the way. That's the Cantillon Effect in visual form. Money, like water, gets intercepted layer by layer as it flows from the top down, and by the time it reaches the bottom, there's very little left. And the people at the bottom are facing goods and services whose prices have already risen. Their purchasing power has been quietly eroded, and the more water you pour in at the top without fixing the flow, the worse it gets. The reservoirs swell higher, the downstream dries out further, and the divide between the two banks of the river grows ever wider. Printing more money without fixing how it circulates doesn't cure the disease, it fits it. But I want to add an important perspective here. Central bank money printing isn't inherently a bad thing. Think about it during a financial crisis or severe recession. If the central bank doesn't intervene, the consequences could be catastrophic. Banks collapsing on a massive scale, deposits evaporating, a cascade of business failures. That kind of damage will hurt ordinary people far more than inflation does. So the real question isn't should they print or not, it's how is the printed money distributed afterward, and is it wound back in time once the crisis passes. When the distribution mechanism breaks down, the side effects of money printing far outweigh its benefits. Alright, after everything we've discussed about currency dilution, you might be wondering, so how can ordinary people protect their purchasing power? In a world where fiat currencies are being steadily diluted, people naturally look for assets that can preserve purchasing power. Gold is one of the oldest and most enduring choices. The fundamental reason gold has played this role for thousands of years is that its supply is subject to hard physical constraints. Annual gold mining output adds only about 1.5 to 2% to the total above-ground stock, and that rate is constrained by geology and physics, not human decision-making. Compare that to fiat currency. A central bank can create trillions of dollars in new money within hours through electronic ledger entries. But the world's gold mines produce a nearly constant amount each year. This fundamental difference in supply elasticity is what allows gold to maintain relatively stable purchasing power over the long run. And recent price action bears this out as of the time I'm recording this. The gold price is up more than 44% compared to a year ago. But to be fair, gold isn't a perfect store of value either. First, gold generates no cash flow. It pays no interest, no dividends. Your return from holding gold comes entirely from price appreciation. Second, gold's short-term price can be highly volatile, driven by market sentiment, the US dollar's strength, interest rate policy, and many other factors. Earlier this year, for example, gold plunged from around $5,600 per ounce to roughly $4,400 within just a few days, wiping out a significant amount of value. Third, in extreme scenarios, government control, confiscation orders, the holding and circulation of physical gold could be restricted. So gold is better positioned as a defensive allocation within a diversified portfolio, rather than your only hedge. Other options worth considering include inflation-linked bonds, broadly diversified investment portfolios, and certain real assets. During normal times, when the monetary system functions well, gold's appeal is limited. But when the monetary system faces a crisis of trust, its role as the ultimate store of value comes sharply into focus. Of course, this isn't investment advice. Past performance doesn't guarantee future returns, Everyone needs to make their own judgment based on their own circumstances. Alright, let's step back now and connect all the threads from everything we've discussed, because when you see them together, a very clear picture emerges. Right now, there are three forces working in concert to push wealth toward the hands of a few. The first force operates at the labor market level. AI displacement suppresses ordinary workers' bargaining power and income, while those who control AI technology and business owners capture an ever larger share of the pie. The second force operates at the market competition level. AI red ocean competition squeezes profit margins for small and medium businesses, while upstream tech giants capture the core profits by monopolizing infrastructure. The third force operates at the monetary policy level. Central bank expansionary operations, through the Cantillon Effect, systematically favor asset holders and large institutions. When these three forces converge, it's as if an invisible pump is continuously drawing money from the bottom and middle layers of the economy up to the very top. Liquidity dries up at the base and pools at the summit. The downstream river runs dry while the upstream reservoir overflows. This persistent concentration of wealth isn't just a question of social fairness, it's a systemic risk to economic stability. When the spending power of a large portion of the population is continuously eroded, economic growth loses its most fundamental engine, domestic demand. Businesses, facing a shrinking market, lose the will to invest, entering a stage of low growth or even stagnation. Government debt becomes even harder to manage during economic stagnation, forcing even deeper dependence on the central bank, creating yet another layer of vicious cycle. History teaches us that extreme wealth inequality is often a precursor to social upheaval. When the majority of people feel that the economic system no longer works for them, trust in institutions erodes, and the risk of populism, protectionism, and even social conflict rise sharply. So, facing this situation, is there a way out? I think there are several directions worth serious consideration. First, we need mechanism to socialize the AI dividend. The enormous productivity gains created by AI shouldn't just show up on the income statements of a few corporations. Levying targeted taxes on the excess profits generated by AI and automation, something like an automation tax or a data tax, and channeling that revenue toward affected workers would be a start. This naturally brings up the concept of Universal Basic Income UBI. The appeal of UBI lies in its simplicity and directness. Everyone gets a basic safety net, which means nobody has to live in fear during the transition period. But let's be honest, UBI is an intensely debated idea. Critics ask, how is it fiscally sustainable? Won't it discourage people from working? Even Finland's experiment produced mixed results at best. A more pragmatic approach might be to first strengthen existing social safety nets, then gradually explore targeted support measures rather than jumping straight to full UBI. Second, we need to fundamentally restructure education and skills training. The skills that traditional education cultivates are depreciating rapidly. We need to pivot toward developing the capabilities that AI finds hardest to replicate: critical thinking, cross-disciplinary synthesis, emotional intelligence, creative problem solving, and deep human-to-human communication. These soft skills are the most valuable assets of the future. The third direction is to reform how monetary policy is transmitted through the economy. We've already seen that conventional central bank operations have a severe distributional bias. The money flows overwhelmingly to the top of the financial system. So we need to explore more direct methods of monetary distribution, such as direct transfer payments, or channeling new money through public investment into infrastructure, green energy, and social services. In other words, we need to find ways to make the water flow directly to the downstream farmland, instead of just filling up the upstream reservoir. Fourth, we need stronger antitrust enforcement and platform governance. The natural tendency toward monopoly in the AI era is stronger than at any point in history. The compounding advantages of data, computing power, and network effects make winner-take-all outcomes more likely than ever. Strengthening antitrust enforcement, promoting open data standards, and requiring algorithmic transparency are essential to preserving market dynamism. The last direction I think is really important. We need to rethink how we measure economic health. We've long relied on GDP growth as the primary metric, but in the AI era, this indicator may become increasingly misleading. GDP might be growing, but if all the fruits of that growth are concentrated in the hands of a few, most people's quality of life could actually be declining. We need to develop more comprehensive measures of economic health, ones that incorporate employment quality, income distribution, social mobility, and environmental sustainability as core dimensions. A healthy river isn't judged by how full the upstream reservoir is. It's judged by whether water flows through every stretch, from the headwaters to the mouth, and whether the ecosystem along every bank is thriving. Alright, let's bring this all together for a final summary. The development of AI and automation will undoubtedly deliver massive productivity gains, and that's a genuinely good thing. But productivity gains don't automatically translate into improvements in social well-being. Today, I walk you through a dangerous pathway. AI displaces labor, causing income to drop and consumption to contract. Red ocean competition prevents AI investment from translating into broad-based commercial gains. Fiscal strain forces central banks to keep printing money. And the printer money, through the Cantillon Effect and the Pareto principle, further accelerates wealth concentration. The end result is a multi-layered, self-reinforcing vicious cycle where money, like water, gets trapped behind dam after dam, and the downstream riverbed grows drier and drier. Most of our current institutional arrangements, labor market structures, tax systems, monetary policy frameworks, antitrust mechanisms were designed in the pre-AI era. At the end of the day, the core message of today's video is actually very simple, and it comes back to the river metaphor I started with. In nature, water must keep flowing. The upstream, midstream, and downstream all need water passing through for plants to grow, for fish and shrimp to thrive, for the entire ecosystem to flourish. The moment water gets trapped held in one place, the downstream dries up and life fades away. Money in the economy works exactly the same way. It needs to keep circulating through society, from businesses to employees, from employees to consumption, from consumption back to businesses. That cycle is the very foundation of economic prosperity. When money is continuously siphoned to the top and trapped in the excess of a few, no longer flowing back down, the economy becomes like a river whose flow has been cut off. The upstream reservoir may be overflowing, but downstream, everything has turned to wasteland. So what we truly need to do is ensure that this economic river flows freely and unobstructed, so that every person can share in the vitality that living water brings. I've talked about a lot of concerning possibilities today, but I don't want anyone to walk away feeling overly pessimistic. Every major technological revolution involves a painful transition period. But over the long run, technological progress has almost always improved humanity's overall standard of living. AI has the potential to solve many problems we currently consider intractable. The cost of medical diagnosis could plummet. Education could finally achieve true personalization. Energy and environmental challenges might find breakthroughs accelerated by AI-powered research. The key question isn't whether AI will make the world better, it's whether, during the transition, we can make sure no one gets left behind and that the fruits of progress are shared more equitably. In the face of this entirely new technological reality, our institutions urgently need fundamental updating and reform. Ultimately, the economic trajectory of the AI era won't be determined by the technology itself. It will be determined by our collective choices as a society. Are we willing and are we able to redesign our systems so that the dividends of technological progress benefit everyone? This isn't just an economic question. It's the most fundamental political and ethical challenge of our era. As ordinary people, what we can do is keep learning, develop skills that AI can't easily replace, diversify our assets to manage risk, and stay engaged in the public policy conversations that shape our future. Because the direction of this era will ultimately be determined by the choices and actions of each and every one of us. The ending of this story isn't pre-written, it depends on the choices we make right now. If you found today's video helpful, make sure to hit that like button and share it with your friends. And don't forget to subscribe and tap the bell icon. I'll see you in the next one. Take care.